Welcome back. If you're new to our channel, we dive deep into history's most gripping and emotional stories. Tonight, we explore a remarkable episode from the first winter of the Great War, when a fleeting moment of peace broke through the brutal reality of the Western Front. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy these stories and want to hear more about history's unsung moments of courage and kindness. Let's dive into this incredible chapter from World War I. It was the first winter of the Great War, and the Western Front had become a frozen wasteland. The trenches, filled with mud and misery, stretched as far as the eye could see, a scar across the European landscape. For months, the soldiers on both sides had endured unimaginable horrors: artillery barrages, poison gas, and the ever-present threat of death. Yet, as Christmas approached, something extraordinary happened, something that defied the very nature of war. It was Christmas Eve, and a bitter chill hung in the air. The British and German soldiers huddled in their trenches, trying to find warmth in the cold, unforgiving earth. The night was dark, the sky obscured by thick clouds, and the only sounds were the distant rumble of artillery and the occasional crack of a rifle. Private William Andrews, a young British soldier from London, pulled his coat tighter around himself and shivered. He was thinking of home, of the warm fire in his family's hearth, of his mother's cooking, and of the carols they would sing together. But here, in the trenches, there was no warmth, no music, only the constant reminder that death could come at any moment. "Cold night, ain't it?" said Corporal John Hardy, who was crouched beside him. Hardy was older, with a face weathered by years of hard labour before the war. He had a gruff demeanour, but there was a kindness in his eyes that put the younger men at ease. "Coldest I've ever known," Andrews replied, his breath visible in the freezing air. "Wouldn't mind a bit of that Christmas pudding right about now," Hardy said with a wistful smile. As the two men shared a moment of quiet reflection, a strange sound began to drift across no man's land, the narrow, desolate strip of land that separated the British and German trenches. At first, it was barely audible, just a faint melody carried on the wind. But slowly, it grew louder, clearer, until Andrews and Hardy could make out the tune. "Silent night, holy night?" Andrews frowned, straining to hear. "Is that singing?" Hardy nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing as he listened. "Aye, sounds like it's coming from the German lines." The men around them began to stir, lifting their heads to listen to the unfamiliar sound. It was a Christmas carol sung in German, the words foreign, but the melody unmistakable. "Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht." For a moment, the war seemed to pause. The guns fell silent, the distant explosions ceased, and the only sound was that hauntingly beautiful song rising into the cold night air. Without thinking, Andrews found himself humming along. The tune was one he had known since childhood, and the words came back to him as if they had been buried deep in his memory, waiting for this moment. "Silent night, holy night." Hardy joined in, his deep voice harmonizing with Andrews. Soon, more voices picked up the song, soldiers on both sides singing together, their voices blending into a single, harmonious choir. It was as if the very air had changed, softened by the music that filled the night. The trenches, once filled with the sounds of war, now echoed with a song of peace, a momentary ceasefire that neither side had planned, but both seemed willing to honour. As the song ended, a strange, almost magical silence fell over the battlefield. And then, from the German lines, a single figure emerged, holding a small, flickering candle. The figure stepped cautiously into no man's land, where no soldier dared to venture. "Look," Andrews whispered, nudging Hardy. The British soldiers watched in stunned silence as more Germans followed, holding candles and small Christmas trees decorated with whatever they could find. Bits of wire, scraps of cloth, even bullet casings. They walked slowly, carefully, as if unsure of how the British would react. Hardy stood up, taking a deep breath. "I reckon we should meet them, don't you?" Andrews hesitated, glancing around at the other men. There was a mixture of fear and curiosity in their eyes. Finally, he nodded. "Yeah, let's go." One by one, the British soldiers climbed out of their trenches, stepping cautiously into no man's land. The ground was cold and hard beneath their feet, the mud frozen in jagged clumps. They moved slowly, their rifles slung over their shoulders, their hands held out in a gesture of peace. When they met in the middle, the British and German soldiers stood facing each other, unsure of what to do next. The war had taught them to hate, to kill without hesitation. But now, in this moment of quiet, they were just men, tired, cold, and longing for home. Frohe Weihnachten, one of the German soldiers said, his voice hesitant but warm. He held out his hand. Merry Christmas, Hardy replied, shaking the man's hand firmly. And that was all it took. The men began to smile, to laugh, shaking hands and exchanging small gifts, cigarettes, tins of food, buttons, anything they could spare. The tension that had gripped them for so long seemed to melt away, replaced by a sense of camaraderie that transcended the language barrier. Andrews found himself talking to a young German soldier, a man not much older than himself. They shared stories of home, of the families they had left behind, and of the simple joys they missed. "Do you think it'll ever end?" the German asked, his voice tinged with sadness. "I hope so," Andrews replied, his heart heavy. "I hope so." As the night wore on, the soldiers built small fires, sitting together and sharing what little food they had. Someone produced a soccer ball, and soon a game broke out in the middle of no man's land, the men laughing and shouting as if they were children again, far away from the horrors of war. For that one night, the war was forgotten. The soldiers, who had been enemies only hours before, were now friends, united by a shared humanity that the war had tried to strip away. It was a night of peace, of joy, and of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this madness. But as dawn approached, the reality of their situation began to sink in. The sun's first light painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, and the men knew that the truce could not last. They would have to return to their trenches, to the fighting, to the war that had torn their lives apart. The German soldier who had befriended Andrews looked at him with sad eyes. "I guess this is goodbye." Andrews nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "Yeah, I guess it is." They shook hands one last time, and then, with heavy hearts, the soldiers returned to their lines. The Christmas truce was over, and the war resumed. But the memory of that night, of the music and the laughter, would stay with them forever. In the years that followed, the Christmas truce of 1914 became a legend, a shining example of the power of humanity in the darkest of times. It was a moment of peace in a world consumed by violence, a brief glimpse of what could be if only the world could learn to see beyond its divisions. And for those who were there, who had sung the carols, shaken hands with their enemies, and played soccer in the cold mud of no man's land, it was a memory they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. A memory of a silent night that brought light to the darkest of days. If you were moved by this extraordinary tale of humanity in the midst of war, please like and subscribe for more incredible stories from history. There are countless moments of bravery, kindness, and hope that we can share with you, moments that remind us of the power of the human spirit.